Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I'm here back for my LPL Week 2 review, overview, analysis, all of that fun stuff. If you guys are excited, let me know down in the comment section below. You guys have been showing a real good support for most of the things on the channel. All the weekly recaps are doing well, and I love making them. So, yeah, I'm just gonna get right into it. We have a big week for LPL action. Oh, I do have one piece of housekeeping to talk about. I think I said this last week in my LCK video, and I believe my LEC video as well. But if you guys are interested in what the schedule is going to look like for the weekly reviews and all of that jazz, I made a community post tab. I don't know how many of you actually that goes out to. So if you're interested at all about the schedule at which these will be posted, that's going to be listed over on the community tab on my channel. Just go ahead and check that out for all that information. But without further ado, let's jump into Week 2 in the LPL that was kicked off by RNG, Royal Never Give Up, taking on ThunderTalk Gaming here, and what was easily ThunderTalk's best series of the year, while also simultaneously being one of RNG's worst series of the year, or at least one of their least clinical from most of their players, I would say. A 2-0 series win here from RNG, nonetheless. TT is still not good. UCal and Chieftain are not in yet. I know I talked a little bit last week about how they had just been signed at the beginning of Week 2. I don't know why I expected them to be ready for Week 1. They have to go through a quarantining process in China before they're actually allowed to play with the team. So maybe they'll be there in Week 3. If not, I'm looking closer to a Week 4 preparation date for TT, for really that team actually existing at all, with any players that are going to be relatively good. But looking at this series, Game 1 was actually super close, and TT had a very big lead in the early game, really kind of due to Puff in the bottom lane, who had a pretty good series. Puff always played, I think, a little bit better against the better teams, and worse against the worst teams when he was on IG, and I think that's kind of showing up here. He played pretty well in the series overall, especially in Game 1 on the Aphelios here with Southwind, again, on the Thresh, the one pick that he's really good at, I should say. You know, you want to give it up for him. You know, if you want to give up Thresh, then you're going to probably lose lane just because he's really good on Thresh in lane. That's really what Southwind does. But they couldn't hang on. RNG with a really good comeback, thanks in large part due to a really good Vex game here from Xiaohu. And then in Game 2 here for TT, it was a little more back and forth in the early game. Not quite as TT favored, but still, you know, relatively even until RNG just kind of blew him out of the water. A lot of this was due to Frigid just not having any sort of control over the jungle. He picked two very aggressive picks here in the Talon and the Diana, and neither of them worked out. If you're going to pick the Talon especially, you kind of have to be the better jungler to play Talon at an optimal level in the LPL, in my opinion. And clearly he was not in this series. You're not going to get bailed out as much by other members of your team as you are with things like the Xin Zhao or the Lee Sin or, you know, just things of that nature, the Jarvan. You don't offer the same kind of utility. So if you're going to be Talon, you kind of have to be better, and Frigid was not better in the series. He is going to be my dud of the series. No surprise there. But my player of the series is going to go to Xiaohu. Xiaohu's really the focal point of this RNG team. What else is new? This looks like a very similar RNG team to the team we had last year, just switching out Cryan for Bin. And I mean that almost exactly. We were talking about Bin as being one of, if not the best top laner coming into the LPL this year. But he has definitely started off very slow here in the first couple weeks. This was not a good series from Bin. He looked basically useless and irrelevant in this series here, going into what was my dud of Week 1 in general in new in the top lane. So you want to see more out of Bin. I think it's kind of the Cryan situation of, you know, sometimes they're going to put all of their resources into Xiaohu because Xiaohu is their best player. But that means that players like the other solo laner, in this case Bin, last year Cryan, is gonna kind of be left out to dry a little bit because they're gonna be given almost no resources at all. And that is exactly what's happening to Bin right now. I don't think you can really sustain that on picks like Jax. I'm expecting more self-sustainable picks in the top lane. I think Gwen was a great pick in Game 2, although it didn't look good. I think that's something more along the lines of what I'm looking at. I think Graves is good. Gragas is good. Those picks I think are going to be more up Bin's alley as the season goes on. But let's talk about Xiaohu and just how he dominated on that Lucian game in Game 2, and even the Vex in Game 1. One of the best series of mid that we've seen so far. He was easily the best player in the series. And that's a good sign for RNG, who have, you know, at points in this series, this season looked good, and at points looked bad, you know, against FPX. But Yeah, overall, a good win here for RNG. You gotta beat up on the bottom teams, and don't get it twisted, TT is for sure one of the bottom teams, and until they get their new players, nothing is going to change in that respect. Moving on to Series 2 of Day 1, it was Anyone's Legend taking on FPX FunPlus Phoenix in a very, very good 2-0 win here for FPX to continue their hot streak to start the season. This team just looks like it's firing on all cylinders. Most specific, I mean, honestly, I've talked about the bot lane a lot in Week 1. You know, kind of going over how good I think this bot lane could be in the grand scheme of things, one of the best in the world. I think this top side is looking unbelievable as well. Xiao Laohu is really, really, really good. And he's very much looking like an upgrade to what they had last year at that position, which I don't think anybody would have said going into this season. But he's looking really, really dominant. Anyone's Legend isn't the best team in the world, so, you know, not expecting them to come out and really, you know, contest things like this. But, you know, still, when FPX looks so good in this kind of series, it's something to celebrate. Game 1 was really, really, you know, it was really clear who the better team was pretty much after 15 minutes. Hang on the Lulu really allowed nothing to happen in the entire series in general, but definitely in Game 1. I really like Gory on this Rise pick. I think it's something that fits him really well. I know people are pretty down on Gory right now, and I do kind of understand why. He is probably the weak point of this FPX team, but even being the weak point, I still don't think he is one of, like, the worst mids in the LPL or anything like that. You know, he didn't play particularly well here against Maple, but I think a lot of that had to do with, you know, Rise into Zoe isn't a particularly great matchup for Rise early on. And then, you know, late game, he was just playing for the team. Beishuan is still in here. I think he's fine. I think a lot of people are overhyping him just a tad. He has good synergy with Xiao Laohu, but I am really interested to see how well this team does once they get Clid back. I do think a proper Clid, like Clid coming in and being, like, good version of Clid would make this team genuinely one of the best teams in the world. So I'm actually really excited for that. But Game 2 is really where we start to get to talking about Xiao Laohu, who just, I mean, that Jace game was just so disgustingly good. He was doing so much damage by the end game here. Jason Talon as a combo is not something that I necessarily, like, think of when I think of, like, really scary duos. But in this game, it absolutely was. The Jason Talon were absolutely everywhere. The Lulu was making sure that neither of them could ever get hurt. And then the Aphelios was doing good damage on the backline. Just a really, really solid Game 2 here. A much, in my opinion, more confident Game 2 here from FPX. But on Anyone's Legend side, they're not that bad. Honestly, there are a lot of bad teams in the LPL, and Anyone's Legend is one of them, but I don't know if they're, like, as bad as a team like TT or, you know, a team like LGD. I don't think I'd put Anyone's Legend on that level. I think there are players on this team that are performing at least relatively well. I think Betty early in the season has been a bright spot. I think Maple had a good series here. He hasn't had quite a great year outside of this, but Maple had a good series here against FPX. But, you know, there's bright spots here. There's also not bright spots, and that for me is going to be Chocho at the support position. If you're going to play an engaged champion, you have to engage at the right times, and that is just not what we're seeing out of Chocho here at support. He's had a rough start to the season for sure, even though Betty has been playing kind of well. It's not necessarily translated to his support partner. You very much could have given this to Xiao Hao, who was just kind of irrelevant in this series, especially on the Viego in the Game 2. He just got completely out-jungled by Beishuan. But Chocho, I think, made more obvious mistakes, so for me, he gets the dud of the series. Obviously, the player of the series here is going to be Xiao Laohu for that Jace game in Game 2. He was phenomenal, and if he can play like that all year long, he's had a good start to the year, I should say. This isn't some random, really good series. He's been good up to this point, but if he can play like this all year long, this team could very much be a contender to win the LPL this year. Moving on to Day 2. Kicking off Day 2 for us was the Clown Fiesta series of the week here in the LPL. I feel like we're going to get at least one of these a week where it's just like, if there's one series you don't go and watch the VODs of, it's this one. And it was LGD taking on JD Gaming. Whew, what a disastrous series this was for both teams, honestly. Kind of a weird series in general. Some things to note, a couple substitutions in this series. Fearness played Game 1 for LGD, Garvey played Game 2, and then Hope actually coming in for LPC in the bottom lane for JD Gaming, and actually just balling out. I mean, being easily the best player on this team up till this point, at any point in the season. Hope looking really, really good coming in. Really, I'll go game by game and kind of talk about what happened, but I'll give a general overview here of this was a 1v9 performance from Hope. 9 players in this game were trying to lose as hard as possible, and Hope was like, I guess I'll win the game. And so, if you're a JDG fan, you got to be pumped that you found someone like Hope who can come in and really carry. I mean, he was awesome on the Jinx. He was really the only good player in this entire series. It's probably the only thing you have to be excited about because that top side is, quite frankly, just abysmal right now. 369 and Kanavi have to figure something out because this is not good. Yagao has not been good. Whatever the problem is with JDG, it is still there. Don't get the 2-0 series win here mixed up. The fact that they won game 2 is a miracle, and entirely on the fact that LGD is bad and Hope is really good. So, but in LGD's case, are any of these 5 players LPL worthy? I mean, Shadow has had a good start to the year. He just had a really bad series here against LGD Gaming. He was one of the worst players on the Rift, but, he's kind of been the bright spot of LGD at the start of the year, so I'm going to give him at least a little bit of a pass. Jinzhao's not good. I was never a fan of Jinzhao, even when he was back playing AD carry. Chinese pros were hyping him up all the time. I wasn't. I never saw it. He swaps over to support here after being middling ADC at best for a long time. And he has been easily probably the worst player in the LPL so far this year. Just a disastrous start to the year for Jinzhao. He's going to be my dud of the series. Obviously, Hope is going to be my player of the series here for JDG. But honestly, you could give it to everyone. Shadow for sure deserves dud of the series here. Honestly, Kanavi and 369 deserve the dud of the series here. They didn't play particularly well. Kanavi basically has to get Kennen, or else he's not going to do anything in the game, and that's terrifying. That's a 369, not Kanavi, I hope. I can't actually remember. But yeah, 369 absolutely needs Kennen to actually play the game, which is really terrifying, because if you ban out Kennen, he's just going to get curb stomped in lane. Fearness had a good game 1 on the Jace, and then they subbed him out, so I don't really know what that was about. Either way, a kind of disastrous series here. The fact that LGD didn't win game 2 is absurd. Game 1 was still pretty back and forth, but at least JDG had full control there because Hope was just kind of going off on the Jinx, and you had a Lulu to kind of keep Jinx a little bit safer, a Malphite for engages, things like that. Game 2 was just a cluster. I mean, I can't even begin to describe what game 2 was. That was just a train wreck in every way. If you are rewatching LPL series, and if you're kind of looking for my review of which ones you should go and see, this is absolutely not one of them. I would stay as far away from this series as I could if I were a viewer, because it was just bowling shoe ugly. Jumping into Series 2 of Day 2, here we had Ultra Prime continuing their climb against all the top teams in the league, apparently. Going up against EDG, Edward Gaming. EDG takes the series 2-1 in what was a very, very close series. Games 2 and 3 were actually really close for both teams. And, shout out to Ultra Prime for hanging, but EDG does take care of business here and moves on to 3-0. Their first loss of the year is actually in game 2 here. So, pretty good series from Ultra Prime. Let's talk about EDG first. A good series out of EDG for the most part. I think some things are really questionable. I need to see better performances overall out of the bot lane. I know the bot lane was super hyped up in week 1. I believe they actually won the LPL bot lane, of the week. They were on, the week 1 all team. I would definitely not have agreed with that. I thought they played fine in week 1. I don't think they necessarily did anything special. I think JJ really was the outstanding member of this EDG team in week 1 for me. And I think they were for sure outplayed by people like LWX and Hang, at least in week 1. But going into week 2, they had a lot to show. And while they didn't play awful in this series, I think they for sure looked like the second best bot lane out of these two teams, which is kind of interesting. And I think a lot of that just has to do with how freaking good Elk is. Elk is so ridiculously good, and it feels like he's so hard stuck on this Ultra Prime team. Not that this team is bad, just in general, this Ultra Prime team seems, mediocre at best, and Elk kind of deserves to be on an LPL contender. But, talking about EDG, JJ had a great series here. His game 3 was essential in order for them to win. His Lee Sin If they don't have that Lee Sin, they don't actually win the series. But you could say the same thing about the Sylas on Scout. And he had a very good game 1 here on the Rise as well, kind of taking over the map. Just a little bit of a worse game 2 here on the Victor. You could give the player of the series to either. For me, it's going to go to JJ. I think he had a little bit more of an impact here, but you could very well have given the player of the series here to Scout in the mid lane, and nobody would bat an eye. But like I said, for Ultra Prime, a really, really big win here in game 2, and then they almost pull out the win in game 3. If Elk doesn't get caught late game, I'm pretty sure that if you give this game, you know, a little bit more time, just a tad bit more, there's a chance that they have a shot in that team fight. Alistair actually gets items. The LeBlanc scales a little bit more. You know, you have your Jinx fully online. Like, I think that there's a chance that Ultra Prime could actually come back and win that game, but, you know, things happen the way they happen. A tough game, or a tough series here from Ultra Prime, who actually did kind of play their hearts out. Hacker is going to be my dud of the series here. The jungle gap was definitely real here, JJ against Hacker. It's a big reason why I gave JJ the player of the series and why I gave Hacker the dud of the series. The jungle gap was pretty large, although he had a pretty good game 2, especially on the Jarvan, and even his game 3 wasn't horrendous. It was the game 1 that really, for me, kind of took down a lot of his stock on the Lee Sin. Not what you wanted to see. Cryin on the Syndra was definitely a little questionable as well. Ulting the ulted Xin Zhao and doing 0 damage in a team fight in game 1 to essentially lose them that team fight was a disaster, but like I said, Elk is ridiculously good. I mean, this guy is like top 2 to 3 ADCs in the LPL. I don't know how anyone could argue that watching him play at this point. He is turbo smurfing on this Ultra Prime team. Every single game that they are in and that they win is due to Elk, and it's just unfortunate that he's stuck on a team where they're just not going to be contenders like that. I overall think that Xiaoxi actually had a really good series. I think that he's been really good this year in general. This bot lane has really stepped up. His game 3 is obviously gonna get questioned because the build on Alistair is definitely questionable. You build the Zanyas on Alistair so that you can stop the Sylas ult, but if that, you know, it's still probably more optimal to go to Locket, and a lot of people are going to talk about that. A lot of people are going to talk about the draft diff or whatever you want to talk about in Ultra Prime's case. I don't blame Xiaoxi too much for the build or anything like that. I get the idea. Do I think it could have been more optimal in other circumstances? Yes, but I always say item builds, for the most part, are, you know, less important than how you play the game. And I think Xiaoxi overall was still pretty good in this series. I think the biggest problems ended up being your jungle mid duo here for Ultra Prime. But, you know, if you're Ultra Prime, you got to be happy with a performance like this against the defending world champions, because they really did step up and look like they were on their level. Elk is phenomenal. And for EDG, you continue to be undefeated. It's not the cleanest series of your life. Flandre comes back in and looks fine here. A lot of people were confused about the Cho'Gath in game 2. I kind of get it, you know. Flandre's always been a little more partial to picks like that. And, you know, I don't think any tank right now is really that bad to play in the top lane. And I think Cho'Gath is just one of them. I think he'll be fine. Just in general, I think EDG looked fine in the series. Not the best they looked all year, but definitely good enough for me to say that this is still one of, if not the best team in the LPL. Moving on to Day 3, the series that kicked off Day 3 for us in Week 2 here was going to be Team WE taking on Top Esports in a pretty consistently solid 2-1 win here for TES. I say that, but I don't mean it at all. I don't know why I said that. This was a very shaky 2-1 win here for Top. Not looking nearly as good as we want to at this point in the year. You gotta be beaten up on teams like WE, who are clearly at the bottom of the standings, and TES didn't necessarily do that in this series. WE actually takes game 1 here, in a game that TES had pretty firm control in, but some really good play by the jungle mid duo in View and Shanks actually saves basically the game for WE here, wins it basically by themselves. A great game from the Xin Zhao and the Rise overall. I know I want to see Beishang in as much as anybody else. I believe he's in quarantine. I believe that's why he hasn't necessarily joined the team yet, but, you know, if Yu's going to play like this, I think he's still going to attract some sort of playing time from WE. He had a really good game here, although he hasn't necessarily been great all year long. He hasn't necessarily been the problem for this WE team at all. In game 2 was definitely more in TES's favor, and so was game 3. Still pretty sloppy at some points. Not everybody on the team looking completely coordinated. This bot lane is going to mess up a lot. That's just what they do. It's Jackie Love and Zhuo. We saw it a lot last year, where they would go for big plays, and sometimes they'd work out, and sometimes they wouldn't. They're going to take a lot of risks, and sometimes they're going to work, and sometimes they're not going to work. Jackie Love had a really good game 3 here on the Jinx. That was kind of the big difference maker in this series. But I think the player of the series for me has to go to Zoom. Up in the top lane, it's looking like an absolute highway robbery that they were able to trade 369 for Zoom. 369 is really struggling, basically being a Ken in one trick here on JDG. And Zoom over here on TES is being one of the more consistent members of this team. Him and Knight are kind of the carrying sticks for this TES team. The reason that they have a winning record at this point. Because I don't even know where they would be with 369. This would be a scarily not good team. More akin to what they were last year for sure, but maybe even worse. I think they're looking a lot better ever since they made their jungle decision here. Xiaopeng, I think, has been better overall than I think than Tian was for this team. I think it's good to see him in. I think he definitely helped here in Game 2 on the Nidalee, which is a pick I don't really love to see, but Game 3 on the Xin Zhao I thought was pretty good as well. And then Knight, I thought, had a fantastic series. He had a killer Game 1, he had a killer Game 2, he had a killer Game 3. Knight very well could be your player of the series. He just didn't have a single game where it felt like he was the best player in the game. He was just really, really good through all of them. So the solo lane's really kind of stepping up here for top. But even the bot lane in Game 3 was really good. Honestly, TES just is super inconsistent, and they have terrible macro, but they're just so mechanically talented that it's hard to really think that they're a bad team in any way. As for WE, this is clearly like a bottom 3, bottom 4 team in the LPL, at least the way it's currently constructed. Biu in the top lane is a disaster. He is pretty easily, at this point, the worst player in the LPL, or at least he has been. I mean, he has been, giga bad for this WE team early in the year. I would not be surprised if he just doesn't play a series after week 2. He is just super high risk, super high reward, but right now there is no reward. It's just risk, and it's not paying off. I always talked about Biu as being somebody who will trade to make those aggressive plays and then die solo a lot in the top lane. That's happening. And Biu's just not been good. The bot lane as well is a huge weakness for this team. That was identified going into the year. This bot lane was never going to be good. Kadaya had a pretty good series earlier in the year. I don't remember against 2, but I remember he hasn't been terrible at all of 2021 or 2022. Not 2021 anymore. But the ADC situation has to be figured out. Stay is in this series. They do swap him out later, but it's not better later. They have to figure out whatever's going on there in the bot lane, because right now it's just not working. Mid jungle showed signs of being good. We know Shanks is a pretty good player, and when they get Beishang back, we know those two have chemistry, but in general, I would think that those two being good is just not going to be enough to carry what is a really weak top and bot side for this WE team, so they got to figure a lot out. Top also has to figure a lot out when it comes to macro, but at least they have the mechanical skill to back it up right now. Moving on to our second series here of day 3, we had LNG Esports taking on Invictus Gaming in a very solid win for LNG. A 2-0 win, very, very comfortable. I guess game 2 wasn't as comfortable, but it was still fun. A very fun game 2. LNG is just a really freaking good team, aren't they? This jungle mid duo, everybody knows that I think jungle mid is the way to win in League right now, at least in the current meta. I think if you're going to have a strong point of the map, that should be it. That's the one you want it to be. Is there a stronger jungle mid in the world than Tarzan Doenby? I mean, maybe Peanut Chovy. I think you could make, obviously, Canyon Showmaker. Tarzan Doenby are right up there. Because this is getting actually scary. At this point, it feels like an absolute cheat code what LNG have done. Tarzan in game 1 just takes over on the Diana, making the game pretty much impossible for anyone to play, especially Jun on the Xin Zhao, who just can't do anything. The Jun takes the Diana in game 2. The Lee Sin in game 2 for Tarzan is still absolutely ludicrous, but not as ludicrous as Doenby's Twisted Fate. First of all, how are you going to allow Doenby to play Twisted Fate? It's always been one of his best picks, with Rise and then all the crazy stuff like Malphite. But TF has always been one of those picks that Doenby is just it feels like is made for him. He gets the TF in game 2, and he leads the game in damage on TF. It's just absurd. It feels like having Doenby as your mid laner is just such a cheat code. And then it feels like having Tarzan as your jungler is also a cheat code. It honestly doesn't matter what anybody else on the team does. Light is actually playing really well. Playing better than he did last year. He's probably the 3rd best member of the team. I still think top lane and support are a little bit questionable. I'm not necessarily as diehard on the free Awandi train as everybody else is here. I think Lumao is a good player, and I think he's playing fine. I think Awandi is better, but I think Lumao is a good player, and I think he has synergy with Light here, and I think Light's kind of getting a lot out of his partnership with Lumao here, but I mean, really, this team is just carried by how freaking good this jungle mid duo is. Doinb is going to be my player of the series here. It could have gone to Tarzan. Tarzan played phenomenal here too, but Doinb is just like on a different level in terms of where he's playing, at least in this series. He just kind of took over the map, took over the game. He led the game in damage on Twisted Fate. A big reason why they won that late game team fight around Barret in game 2 that essentially sealed the game. After it had been pretty up and down, IG doing a good job to come back there. IG actually making a change here. They put On here in the bot lane for Xiao Yueji. On looked fine. I think Xiao Yueji looked fine as well. I don't think either of them have really been the issue for this team. Jun is going to be my dud of the series here, getting just completely out-jungled by Tarzan at pretty much every single aspect. Getting destroyed by the Diana in game 1 and then taking the Diana in game 2 and looking inept is not a good look for Jun. Jun's always been that kind of player, though. He's very feast or famine. He's very much going to look for those aggressive plays. Sometimes they're going to work out and they're going to get IG big leads. We saw that earlier in the year, I believe, in their first series. But sometimes they're not going to work out, and he's going to get absolutely pulverized like he did in the series by Tarzan. Just kind of a big diffy in the jiffy, if we're talking like that. But IG is not really a team that's looking to win right now. I think they're just looking to see what they have in a lot of their youngsters. Uakai kind of needs to step up. I was pretty high on Uakai coming into the year. He hasn't necessarily shown it yet, but again, tough competition here in this game. The bot lane wasn't terrible. On and Lucas were fine, but I thought Xiao Yueji and Lucas were also fine. I haven't really seen a major difference between On and Xiao Yueji. You can kind of decide which one you like better. And then Nenny's been whatever in the top lane. Ali didn't have a great series overall, so Nenny had some opportunity to maybe bully out a little bit in game 2 on the Graves, but just in general, Nenny's been fine. IG kind of looking exactly as we expected. Not a good team. Not like a terribly bad team. They can still kind of hold their own in these kind of games, but never going to win them. Just kind of a bottom, out of playoffs team that is looking to develop. But for LNG, golly, if this duo can continue to fire on this cylinder all year long, I don't know if there's a team that I'm more scared of going into playoffs than LNG. Moving on to day 4. Kicking off day 4 for us was a fun matchup between two potential playoff teams here in Rare Adam taking on Victory 5. And a 2-1 series win here for Victory 5 that they very much needed. This is their first series with their full roster. You got Rich here in the top lane, finally making it in. And I've said a lot of crap about Rich. I didn't think he was very good over the past year on Nongshim. He was definitely the weakness for that roster. He comes in here and is actually really, really instrumental in this series when he looked really good in games 1 and 3, especially on the Gragas. That looks like a pick that's going to be pretty big for him. But really, the story of this series has to be Rookie never left, did he? The stories of Rookie's demise have been greatly exaggerated because he is still freaking phenomenal. I mean, this team is, 2-0 now? And both of their series wins are because Rookie is just too good. Rookie's so good. How do you allow him to have Victor for both games 2 and game 3 when he absolutely takes over both games? It's absurd to me. He's running down iBoy pretty much 24/7 late game in that game 2 and that game 3. There's almost nothing they can do. But let's talk about game 1, because that was RA's game. A trend that I will say did last throughout all 3 games in the series. Leon did a really good job of getting advantages early. He got it on the Kiana, he got it on the Viego, and he got it on the Nidalee. Games 2 and 3, and even game 1, he did a little bit of trolling. He's very similar to me to someone like Armeo or Grig or whatever you want to call him in North America, where it feels like he's really adept at getting these leads and then just has no idea what to do once he has the gold. And that's essentially what happened here. He kind of trolled it a little bit in game 1. He did come back and basically won their last team fight for them on the Kiana. Was very important for them on game 1. Leon, looking good. I know some people don't want to see him in this Rare Adam lineup because you've got Superstar Rookie behind him, but I think he looked fine, and he was kind of the reason they won game 1. He was also the reason it was close in general, so maybe not. But then games 2 and 3, he also got pretty big leads in the jungle, just couldn't do anything with them. Karsa is obviously a much better macro presence than Leon is, and that was definitely very apparent in the games that V5 was able to win, even with Leon having gold. But really, like I said, the series is entirely about the solo lanes. Rookie looking completely dominant here on the Victor, and Rich having actually a really good game 3 here on the Gragas. Definitely looking better than a lot of what he looked like last year. If you're getting that version of Rich this year, I think this team could actually push for a higher playoff seed, maybe something like a 4, 5, 6 seed this year, as opposed to closer to 7 or 8, which I think a lot of people had them. Bot lane does have to play better for this V5 team. It wasn't the cleanest series here from bot lane. Fodic definitely still has some nerves, and he's gonna get over that later in the week. He has a really good series later in the week, but for this one, definitely not the best series from bot lane. But it wasn't the best series from bot lane on the other side either. iBoy is going to be my dud of the series here. Not even really entirely his fault, but playing the Jinx, not a ton of peel on the team just in general. Really, it was just the Rakan and the Leona who both want to go in. But kind of just got run down by the Victor by the end of the series. Not much iBoy could do, just was basically fodder by the end of games 2 and games 3. Just not looking good here. iBoy's a big reason why this team looked good in week 1 in general, and they're gonna really need him to be like the focal point carry for this team, at least like later in games, because Leon can definitely be that early, but later in games it's gonna have to be iBoy. This team doesn't really have a ton of other players that can do that. Strive has been pretty good to start the year, but Zora has been a disaster at the support position in my opinion. Just someone with zero consistency. I believe that is by far the weak point of this Rare Atom team. And then Cube is just kind of a fine top laner, not really like a super standout player, I would say, in any way. But if you're Rare Atom and you want to get back on track here, you're a good team, and you're losing to good teams, and you're putting up a fight against good teams, and that's a good sign. But I'm not sure this team is ever going to be higher than something like 9th or 8th in terms of ceiling, just because I think their lows are just a little bit too low for me. But for Victory 5, man, if Rookie plays like this all year, he's going to win MVP. And if you have an MVP rookie on your hands, you're for sure going to be a lot better than teams expect, especially if Rich is going to be performing as well. Karst is really consistent in the jungle. And while bot lane didn't have a great series here, they do step it up later in the week. So a really good series here for Victory 5 and a nice win for them in general. Jumping into our second series of day 4 here, we had OMG, oh my god, taking on BLG in Bilibili Gaming. A 2-1 series win here for BLG, and the team is finally looking like the super team that everybody wanted to see coming into this year. OMG is not a bad side at all. This team went 3-0, 6-0 in the first week for a reason. They are capable of beating up on the bad teams, and they very, very likely could be a playoff team come the end of the season. And so for BLG to come out and look really, really good, especially in games 2 and 3, against this team, I think is a really nice stepping point for them to propel up their confidence for the rest of the season. You have OMG here winning game 1, actually in a really good game from Cream here on the Corki. We've seen that many, many times out of Cream over the course of the beginning of the season. He was my player of the week in all of week 1 for a reason. He was phenomenal early, and he was really good late as well. He just had a good series here going up against Fofo, who we know is one of the better mids in all of the LPL. So for Cream to kind of hold his own, especially in game 1 here, he looked really good. I think is a really solid sign for OMG. Everyone else not necessarily holding up their end of the bargain. Mostly this bottom lane, who game 2 just got absolutely destroyed. We talked a lot of crap on Doggo earlier in the year. He was having a little bit of a slow start. He has, whatever nerves he had were clearly bounced away in this series. He looked unbelievable here. He's going to be my player of the series for BLG here. His game 2 really, it felt like almost demoralized OMG. He was so dominant in that game that he came back in game 3 and looked really good as well here. Him and Crisp are developing a nice chemistry. Obviously, I don't know how much Doggo is going to play this year, but if he is going to continue to play like this year, it's going to be hard to bench him, although it's Uzi, so who has any idea, right, of what BLG is even thinking here. As for the rest of the team, I thought Weiwei actually had another really solid series. He was a big reason why BLG won their first series of the year, and he looked solid here too. I think when Breathe and Weiwei can really get that connection going, this could be a really, really dangerous topside for BLG, one of the best in the world, if they really do come together. Breathe was phenomenal last year, and Weiwei looks like he's picking up on the best parts of where he was in 2020 and 2021. Fofo was probably the quote-unquote most disappointing member of the team in this series, but that was only because of the game 1 against Cream. Even then, Fofo still looking like a super team caliber mid laner, and I imagine that he'll look much better as the season goes on. But really, this was about the bot lane. Doggo and Crisp looking really, really, really good. Crisp being awesome on the Thresh and Nautilus. Those hook champions have always been Crisp's specialty. And he showed that off here. And then, like I said, Doggo just getting his confidence back. That Aphelios pick is really, really, really dangerous to play into. But on the OMG side, my dud of the series is going to go to Cold. Cold kind of had a rough series here. I've been a little bit higher on Cold, I think, in general, over the past few years. But he just can't stand up to a super team bot lane. It's just, he is, at best, a mid-tier support. And, but probably at worst, like a mid-tier support. He's probably in that category if he gives you that high floor, but a little bit of the low ceiling, and that's kind of what we got in this series here. Abel is super talented, but he's just not going to be talented enough to go up against this team. Doggo really outplayed this bot lane really, really hard. And Crisp had a good series, too. I don't want to take away from Crisp, but Doggo looked really, really good in this series. As for top side, it needs to get a little bit more consistent. Shanji was kind of irrelevant. Aki was fine in the series, but obviously getting out jungle by Weiwei isn't that big of a deal. Aki certainly has had series where he's played worse, especially with 2 games on Talon. One of them being losing is kind of it's just a hard proposition to ask, being relevant on Talon when your team is kind of losing around you. And like I said, Cream was probably the highlight of OMG for the series, even though they lost. But overall, really solid series from OMG. Not good enough to beat BLG, but they're going to be one of the best teams here. Definitely not the worst first loss in the world for OMG that you could possibly have. Just a little bit of question marks in the bot lane, which has been kind of the question mark of OMG even up to this point this year. And then for BLG, you're just going to be really excited to see this bot lane like turbo stomp in Game 2 and then look really good in Game 3 as well. That's one of the more exciting prospects I think you're going to take out of this. And then if you can get that top side really clicking on all cylinders, BLG is going to be exactly what everybody was hyping them up to be in the offseason. Now we're getting set and jumping into our triple game days, starting with day 5 being kicked off with Ultra Prime taking on LGD Gaming in a 2-1 series win, their first series of the year, their first series win of the year here for Ultra Prime, which just feels like a dirty statement to say because they've looked pretty good all year long. They've just been against some of the top teams in the LPL to start the year off. They finally get a lower tier opponent and they do pull out the series win, although it wasn't as clean as I would have hoped it would have been. Elk still looks like just an absolute monster. He's in such purgatory, stuck on this Ultra Prime team. Not with Xiaoxi. Xiaoxi also looked really good. This bot lane overall has just been really freaking good for Ultra Prime throughout the entire year, even going up against the really good teams. They've shown that they are one of the best bot lanes in the LPL. And that very much was true in this series, where they basically hard carried this Ultra Prime team to a win over LGD. Elk is just too freaking good. He was 3rd team All-Pro last year for a reason. Of course, he was on a much better team, but he comes to a much worse team this year, and he's playing maybe even better than he did last year. Just a ridiculous start to the year for Elk. Really, really happy for him. Xiaoxi's doing really well in that same vein. It's that top side that's really just not good. Hacker is really been disappointing to start this year. Hacker has always been someone I've actually been personally a little bit higher on. This year has not been proven correct on that. He has definitely been the detriment of this Ultra Prime team. Not that Zeus and Cryan are that much better. ZS, whatever, ZS, you know, whatever you want to call them. They haven't been much better. Hacker's kind of been the main weakness, I would say, for this team. In the jungle position, you really, really can't be that in 2022. But for LGD, a decently solid series here, especially from Shadow. Like I said, Shadow had kind of a rough series earlier in the week, but he was giga smurfing in this one. He's the only competent player on this LGD team, and he is really kind of hard stuck. I feel bad because Shadow does feel like a very solid player. If you switched Hacker and Shadow, I think Ultra Prime could actually be a really scary team in playoffs, but that's not the situation we have. Shadow's going to be hard stuck on LGD, and Hacker is going to be bringing down the ceiling of what Ultra Prime can actually accomplish. Fearness with not a bad series at all, but the bot lane just got absolutely destroyed here, as they have been the entire year, honestly. Eric and Jinjiao just aren't good. Eric is not, you know, what he was even just a year ago, and Jinjiao is just maybe the worst player in the league. Him and Biu are really fighting over that title right now, so yeah, this was really a bot diff all the way. Elk just being that much better than Eric and than Jinjiao, and just kind of taking over the series because of it, so a little bit unfortunate there for LGD because Shadow did have a really phenomenal series. His Game 2 on Jinjiao was great. Even his Game 3 on Diana was really worth praising. Just really couldn't do anything with it because Elk was too far ahead at that point. But yeah, overall for LGD, you're a terrible team. You're one of the bottom 3 teams in the league. Not much to really talk about there. Shadow's really good. Fearness shows a lot of good things. You know, you're just hoping that the bot side of your map cannot be such a train wreck. And then for Ultra Prime, Elk is a god. Elk is actually a god. He might be one of the best AD carries in the entire world, unfortunately stuck on this team. Xiaoxi is playing really well as well. If they can get that top side short up, this team is going to be a playoff team, I hope, because Elk deserves. If Elk misses playoffs, I'm going to lose my freaking mind. He's just too good to miss playoffs. So if he misses playoffs, I'm going to lose it. But fingers crossed that Ultra Prime can get it together and kick him into the slot he deserves to be in. Jumping into our second series here of Day 5, we had RNG, Royal Never Give Up, taking on Anyone's Legend in a 3-game set that I don't think a lot of people expected to go 3 games. You have one of the top teams here in RNG, one of the bottom teams here in Anyone's Legend, but clearly the two teams they have a difference, and that difference is Xiaohu. Because Xiaohu, holy lord, what a Giga Chad performance in Game 3 on this Vex. This is the best game of Vex internationally yet. I will take no other substitutes. Absolutely disgusting, but let's talk about it game by game. Game 1 was a pretty nice Anyone's Legend win. Xiaohao got a lead early here on the Xin Zhao. Wei played really poor on the Diana in the early game, and then Betty was just able to take over team fights late. Betty's actually been a really, really consistently solid positive for this Anyone's Legend team to start the year. Betty's been really, really inconsistent ever since he came to the LPL a couple of years ago, but this was a really good performance. And in Game 1, he was really a big reason why this team won. Him and Xiaohao played really well and had good synergy together. Xiaohao won the early game, and Betty carried them late. So I want to give a small shout out to Betty, who has been playing well at the beginning of the LPL season here. But Games 2 and 3 were the Xiaohu show. In Game 2, Ming had a ridiculous game on Thresh. Gala's been a little underperforming at the start of this year. I was lower on Gala going into the year than I think a lot of people were, which you could see due to my power rankings, but I was lower on Gala, and he's kind of not shown up in the same way that he usually does at the beginning of this year. He's been a little passive for me, and the game's really been decided about whether or not Xiaohu can carry, and that's what happened in both Games 2 and 3, especially Game 3. Like I said, I don't think there was a better Vex game that I've ever seen. If you want a tutorial on how to dominate a game on Vex, please go watch Game 3 here. Xiaohu teaches you. If you're not converted to the Church of Xiaohu in Spring at this point, Spring Xiaohu it's a different beast. It's a different animal. This is just the best version of Xiaohu you're ever going to see. Wei actually struggled a bit in this series. Wei's kind of been a pretty consistent part of the RNG success early on in the year, but he was definitely struggling early here. He definitely turned it around by the end of the games, but he played really poor in Game 1. He was a big reason why they lost that Game 1 in general, but I was talking earlier in the week about how Bin was struggling and how he wasn't getting the same resources that he was on Suning. They decided to give him resources this series instead of Xiaohu, at least all of them, and that worked out a lot. Bin played a lot better. I thought this was by far his best series on RNG up to this point. Yeah, obviously it's against worse competition, but I think that might be a decent strategy going forward, is to give Bin a little bit more attention, but Ming obviously looking great. Gala and Wei looking a little questionable, but, you know, coming through in the end, and then Xiaohu just being an absolute carry god. What an amazing series from him. He's clearly going to be my player of the series. He was easily the best player on the Rift here. The Rift here. The Rift? What am I talking about? For Anyone's Legend, my dud of the series is going to go to Chocho. Just kind of the weak point of all 3 games. Chocho's kind of been the weak point of this Anyone's Legend team at the beginning of the year here. Just dies way too much for my liking. As a former AD carry player, you would hope that he would be a little bit safer on a lot of these plays, but he's not. He just dies a lot. And I know you're on Leona, Nautilus, and Braum, you're going to die a lot, but this is just excessive. He's giving the enemy team way too much gold, and he's making Betty's job, Betty playing well, a lot harder to actually carry, because he gives a lot of gold away to the enemy team. And, you know, when you're on Jinx, it's kind of hard to just win the game by yourself. So, Maple needs to step up. Definitely as well. You know, I wasn't expecting a ton coming out of Maple. He had a really good year in the PCS last year, but he's never really been an LPL level player. Even when he was on LNG a couple of years ago, he wasn't that. And so, he's just a bottom tier. I'm not going to say a bottom tier, but like maybe just above bottom tier LPL mid at this point. Not so good. Xiaohao looked good in the first game, but kind of got steamrolled in games after that. Anyone's Legend's just a bottom tier team. Maybe in the same way that Maple's not a bottom tier mid laner. Anyone's Legend's not a bottom tier team. They're just not a playoff team. They're going to pretty consistently sit for me in that like 12 to 14, 15 range. for LPL teams, and that's fine. RNG definitely want to be higher than that, and if Xiaohu plays like this, I don't know, I don't know who's going to beat Xiaohu when he's absolutely dominating like this, but this team does have cracks, and if they don't start filling those cracks soon, Xiaohu can only do so much, but, I mean, really, Xiaohu can do a lot, so what do I know? Jumping in to the final game of the 9-game day, or the final series of the 9-game day here in the LPL on day 5, we had LGD Gaming taking on Weibo Gaming. TT finally getting their first win of the season, not in the series, but just in a game. Game 2, good for TT there. Weibo does take it 2-1 in a series that really should have been less close than this. TT's not good. They have so many problems, most of which, I should say, is Frigid in the jungle. Man, he is just not so good. Those Lee Sin mechanics are not good. Kicking Gragas in that game 3 fight, that like penultimate fight, they're kicking Gragas right into the backline and he just gets like a 4-man knockup. Complete team troll there from Frigid. One of the worst games of Lee Sin I've seen. I don't want to troll him too hard though. It's just a bad game. Everybody has bad games. Just not a good series from him. Not a good series from New. You could absolutely give the dud of the series to either of them. For me, it is going to go to Frigid, but New deserves it as well. I mean, those Ord mechanics are not there. He got absolutely destroyed in lane by the Shy, who is my player of the series here. The Shy looks unlocked. Both him and Rookie leave IG, and both look better. And even Puff and Southwind in this series. We talk about TT not looking good at all. Puff and Southwind had a really rough week 1. They were not good in week 1. They were much better here in week 2, and they were actually really close to making this series interesting. They were the reason this team won in game 2, and then Puff was the reason this game was interesting in game 3. He got really ahead on the Jinx. This Jinx pick is good for Puff. Keep giving it to him. Especially once you get Chieftain and Yukal in here, this team might be a little bit better. New is still going to be an absolute disaster in the top lane, but if Puff and Southwind cannot be a huge weakness for this team, maybe TT isn't that bad. As for Weibo, honestly, not a lot to talk about here. This team actually doesn't look very clinical. They look very talented. I think that's really the way to put it, is they win lane and then don't really know what to do with it. Huanfeng's really not good at playing weak side. He never has been, but he's definitely showing that off here. And, I mean, on Caitlyn, you're not really supposed to play weak side, but game 2 on that Aphelios was not a good game for Huanfeng. Definitely needs to improve there. Obviously, On's playing over Sword Art because apparently in scrims, Sword Art is, like, not good, and On is playing significantly better. They feel like they have a better shot at winning with On than they do with Sword Art, and if that's the decision they want to make, that's great. But it is going to, in my opinion, take a pretty big hit on the macro play of this Weibo Gaming team, which we absolutely see. They have bad macro. I really have no other way to say it other than they have really, really bad macro, and they got to get better at that. Nobody on this team is particularly shot call oriented. Sword Art was supposed to be that guy, but he's not playing right now. On was kind of slotted in to be that guy last year. He didn't have that. That's not his style. He's not that shot caller type. But, this team is so mechanically good that they are going to be able to beat up on these lower tier teams. I just kind of worry about their placing in the grand scheme of some top teams. Because when you're going up against the best, you got to have both. And right now, this team doesn't have both. They just have the early game mechanics. So hopefully they can figure it out. SOFM really needs to step it up. He's had kind of a soft start to the year. The Kha'Zix game is really interesting in game 1. I give him props for that. But generally, I think you got to play better if you're SOFM. And you got to take a bigger role, I think, in this team if they really want to have a more standout start to the year. Or even just finish to the year. Playoff run, whatever you want to call it, right? If they're going to have those expectations, the jungle has to step up. But still, a nice win here. The Shy playing really well. Angel and Huanfeng playing well in team fights. But really, this was a solo lane show in the early game that just kind of got out of control. And then Puff and Southwind playing pretty well for TT. So, some good things for TT, some bad things for TT, some good things for Weibo, some bad things for Weibo. Just a good learning experience for both sides here. Moving on to day 6. Kicking off day 6 for us was LNG Esports taking on Team WE in a battle of top versus bottom. And it went exactly as you would expect with LNG doing a really solid 2-0 win here and it never really looking at all in jeopardy. LNG was just so much better. I don't really know how to spend a ton of time on the series. We can talk about the 2 members of LNG that looked really good. And for the first time this series, they're not Tarzan and Doenby. It was actually Light who really became the big star for LNG in the series. His Aphelios mechanics in Game 1 were disgusting, and he got helped out by a lot of dives in Game 2, but still looked really, really good on the Jinx. Light is going to be my player of the series. He's had a pretty good start to the year here. He's easily, in my opinion, been the third best player on this LNG team that just looks unstoppable. And for Light to be in that position, I think is really strong for them. Ale also played really well here, especially in Game 2 on that Camille, pretty much perma-diving the poor Aphelios bot lane. Xing does get subbed in here for Stay on WE. He doesn't look any better, particularly. He didn't really have a lot of choice there. He got dived over and over again bot lane, but what are you going to do? This WE bot lane is always going to be a weakness for this team. Their bot lane position, they just have probably the worst position group for that position in all of the LPL. Kadaya isn't helping. Kadaya has not had a good season as well. I mean, he had one good game, but outside of that, not so great. It's really just been the View and Shank show. Bew is, again, going to be my dud of the series. He just, again, does nothing. He dies a lot and accomplishes nothing. He needs to get benched yesterday, in my opinion. I don't mean to sound, like, flamey, but he has been not good at all for this WE team. And, you know, at some point, it's really going to start costing them. And, you know, I mean, they start the year 0-4, so I guess it has kind of cost them a bit, but this team is not good at all. They are worse than a lot of the bottom teams in the LPL, at least right now. But not really a lot to talk about. Everybody on LNG just looking good. I don't think anybody really on that team took it too seriously. They were just kind of coasting. Lumao actually looked pretty good in this series. No mistakes. That Lulu pick is really good for him. I really like that in general. But yeah, everybody on LNG just looking really solid without any real worry at all. And then WE, like I said, is just a total train wreck at this point. BB in the top lane is a gigantic weakness. This bot lane might be the worst in the LPL. The mid and jungle can only do so much. I like Shanks in general, but, you know, this wasn't the series for him. And then View is just not as good as Beishong. Even if he has good chemistry with Shanks, it's just, you know, you're only going to get so much out of WE, especially going into LNG here. So, pretty obvious outcome overall, but everybody kind of played to expectations. So, not too much to talk about. Moving into our second series here of day 6, we had what was probably the biggest upset of the week here. JD Gaming actually being able to take down the undefeated FPX FunPlus Phoenix. A really, really solid series here from JDG, but really, it was all Yagao. And that is a weird sentence to say because he's had a really bad start to the year. He was not looking good in any of the series leading up to this point, but he looked really, really good in this series. He put on his carry pants for this one, but let's take it game by game here. Game 1 was a pretty solid FPX win. They looked completely in control. The bot lane really carrying it. Again, LWX and Hang look really good. That Aphelios Thresh combo is really deadly in the hands of people who can really properly use it. And FPX is certainly a bot lane that can properly use it. We saw them absolutely dominate in Game 1. I love Hope's addition. I think he's added a lot to JD Gaming, but he did very much get gapped in Game 1. Kanavi, obviously, not looking great. That's kind of been a trend as well. And 369 did get his Kennen, but it didn't matter in Game 1. You move on to Game 2. It was a game that FPX probably should have won in general, but JDG does a really good job of coming back. Yagao on the Victor is doing ridiculous damage by the end of the game there. Just kind of taking over team fights and being really, really solid for JDG. And then in Game 3, the early game was pretty much a disaster for FPX. You have a really weird path here from Beishwan on the Lee Sin. That essentially involves a dive that gets everyone killed, and JD just gets this huge lead early. And then late game Hang, whatever the disconnect was between Beishwan and Hang on the ultimates, obviously they wanted to time the Lee Sin and Leona ultimates together. They hit basically 0 throughout the entire game, and when your Leona ults aren't hitting in team fights, she is not as useful of a champion. And Yagao on the Corki was just at that point in the game where he could just completely take over, and he absolutely did. Yagao is clearly my player of the series here. He was easily the most important player for either team here. Although I want to give a little bit of a shout out to Missing, who has been a little MIA, missing in action, a little bit of a pun there, to start the year, but he had a pretty good series here. He linked up with Yagao really well, especially in Game 3 here on the Nautilus. Liked that pick a lot. And then Game 2 on the Karma was actually really good for Missing as well. But for FPX, when we're looking at dud of the series, it is going to go to Beishwan. The pathing in Game 3 was a little questionable, and then the Game 2 wasn't great either. I think you could give this to Hang. Hang did not have a good Game 3, but he had a really good Game 1. And so for me, it's going to go to the player who played worse overall. I think a lot of people are going to want to say that Gory should have this, And while Gory did kind of get gapped in the mid lane, especially in that game 2 on the Yasuo, you got to play better there. I think a lot of the things that were wrong with Gory's matchup in this game were not necessarily his fault. So I don't want to blame him too hard. He got global picks that weren't supposed to win in lane. So it's just hard for me to be really pissed at him for not showing out here. Obviously, Zhao Laohu is a good player, but you're not going to have a ton of impact if your team is losing so hard on the bottom side of the map. Just from good, I guess, almost bad jungling here from Beishuan. I think FPX is going to look a lot better when Klid does eventually join this lineup. I know a lot of people are excited to see him join. I'm really excited to see him join. This first loss isn't a disaster like raise the red flag area or anything, but it certainly is a good win for JD Gaming. And if you're Yagao, God, I hope he can continue this kind of play throughout the entire year. If you can get the hope that you got earlier in the week and the Yagao that you got here, maybe the weakness that is 369 and Kanavi up on that top side isn't going to be so apparent if those two are actually playing well, but part of me wonders if this is just a one-off for Yagao, because he's shown this in the past. I'm just hoping he can continue it on for at least a few weeks. Jumping into our final game series of day 6 here, we had EDG Edward Gaming taking on OMG in, oh my god, a pretty classic matchup here in the LPL, and OMG getting a little exposed in this series, at least just a tad. EDG's so freaking good. They sub Xiaoshang in here in the top lane again. They did that earlier last week as well. You know, for Flandre, it looks like they're going to be splitting time. I'm not bothered by that. If they see something in Xiaoshang that makes him, you know, on the same level as Flandre, I'm for sure with that. The Ornn game was a little sus at times, but, you know, he still solo killed Jinx in that last fight, so who am I to talk? But just an EDG domination series here. They never really looked out of control. Game 1 was a stomp. Viper, I mean, Viper must have heard me talking shit about his series early in the year where he got gapped a little bit by Elk. I wouldn't say gapped, but just a little bit outplayed by Elk on Ultra Prime earlier in the week. He did not get outplayed in this series. That is for sure. He's easily going to be my player of the series here. He was phenomenal on the Ezreal in Game 1 and on the Aphelios in Game 2. His two most iconic champions, two champions that you really could associate with Viper. And this is why. When he gets these picks and he's able to take over, he will win you games by himself like he did last year. He was my player of the year globally last year for a reason. He's just phenomenal when he's online. And that's what he was in this game. But everybody on EDG was basically online. Like I said, Game 1 was kind of a stomp. Game 2, every single lane lost for OMG. You got to feel for Aki just a bit. Aki was actually a little bit ahead in the jungle in Game 2 on the Rek'Sai, which happens in the matchup with Lee Sin, but every single lane lost, and so it was really difficult for Aki to actually make any plays. I do feel a little bit bad on that respect. Aki's actually had a pretty strong start to the year in general. And then Cream and Abel, while there are kind of pseudo-hyper carries for the team, when you're going up against Scout and Viper, it's just hard for them to get early game advantages, and they didn't in this series. Shanji is going to be my dud of the series. Going up against Xiaoshang, who did show some questionable Ornn mechanics, he still was kind of not so good, especially in that Game 2 on Renekton, didn't show a lot of what we were looking for. So, while Shanji, I think, has shown some good things to start the year, this was definitely his worst series to date, but it is against EDG, so not really too much to take away there. A little bit of a boring series, EDG just kind of stomping, but everybody on the team looking really good, especially Viper, who just looks like an absolute... Mako as well. I don't want to take away from Mako, who's still one of the best sports in the world, but Viper looked absolutely deadly in this series. And then on OMG's side, nobody looking particularly great. Aki looking fine, but not particularly great. And then you just kind of hope that, you know, these are young players. You're not expecting them to be able to go one-on-one with Scout and Viper and Mako and JJ and all these players, right? This isn't a terrible outcome for such a young team. You're just hoping that one day this core is going to show enough that they're going to be able to grow into being able to take on a team like EDG. They're just not there yet. Jumping into the first series here of the final day, day 7 of LPL action in week 2, we had Anyone's Legend taking on Weibo Gaming in a battle of teams with terrible macro going head-to-head. That is the best way you could possibly describe this series. Game 1 was kind of a stomp. A really just confident Weibo team that they're better than everyone else just won the game. Rakan with some really good engages here. On actually had a really good series. He is going to be my player of the series, but for a couple of reasons. He had a really good game 1 here on the Rakan with the engages. Loved what he was doing here. Game 2, Anyone's Legend not only gets Soul, but they're up like 9 kills to 1. But they don't even have a gold lead because they've given up like 4 or 5 towers. What kind of macro is this? I didn't think anyone was going to have worse macro than Weibo this year, but holy crap, anyone's legend certainly did it. This team really knows how to fight, and they really don't know how to do anything else, and that's very concerning. They're so talented. I think Betty is actually playing so well here as their AD carry, and I think in fights, like, ZDZ and Maple are playing fine. At least against Weibo, they played fine. But man, they just got out-macroed at every aspect. I'm going to have to blame that at least a little bit on Xiaohao, who just made some weird decisions throughout the entire series. He's going to be my dud of the series here. 2 games of Xinjiao, he played fine, especially in fights, but man, they traded a lot to the point where they actually traded a win out. There was no reason they should have lost game 2, but they absolutely did, so not a good showing here from anyone's legend in terms of macro and decision-making, but, you know, if you're Weibo, to win on that front is a huge win, because this is a team that I criticized earlier in the week for not having macro and not being able to win in that aspect, but they certainly did in this series. On had some really great engages on the Rakan that ended up helping them win the fights that they did need to win. The Shy is having a good time up there in the top lane. I'm happy for him. I need to see a little bit more consistency out of SOFM, like I said, but this series on Trundle, it was definitely a more comfort pick for him, and he looked a lot better than I think he did earlier in the week, so I'm not going to put that too much on him. Angel actually looking really good on the Corki in game 2 as well. He was a big reason they won that team fight late, but the game 1 was a little questionable. Not questionable, just everybody else kind of showed out a little bit more for me. Overall, a good win for Weibo. They very much needed it because, you know, for them to win on macro is just huge for this team's confidence, I would assume. A lot of people are clamoring for Sword Art, you know, the Sword Art hype train, the Sword Art copium train. I think On might just be the better player, but Sword Art's definitely going to be the one that helps this team's macro. But if you're going up against a team like anyone's legend, maybe you don't need help with macro. Maybe you just kind of expect them to throw the game enough for you to be able to win it. So, kind of an interesting series here in general. If you're anyone's legend, the big takeaway here is that you're perfectly capable of dominating team fights against a team as mechanically talented as Weibo. And I think that's a really good sign. Betty really is playing, like, out of his mind right now. Betty's looking the best he's ever looked in the LPL, in my opinion, right now this year. But, again, it's that macro, it's the decision-making, it's everything around that's just not working for this anyone's legend team. So, some takeaways that are really good, because mechanically they look really good, but macro-wise they look terrible. Which is what I usually say about Weibo, but in this series, it was kind of flipped. Weibo are probably going to feel lucky to get out of here with a 2-0 win. Jumping into our second series of Day 7 here, we had Invictus Gaming taking on RNG, Royal Never Give Up, and a 2-0 win for RNG. This team looks really, really good when they click, and this series they definitely clicked. Yes, there is a skill gap between these teams, obviously, but I actually think IG kind of held up their end at least a little bit. RNG with some solid wins, but IG not looking completely lost. Again, this series was really a Xiaohu clinic. He's playing out of his mind to start this year, and I think that's awesome. There's nothing but excitement around that for me. But I want to give a small shout out here to Ming. Ming had a really, really good series. A great game 1 here on the Nautilus, even a great game 2 here on the Thresh. And we finally got Gala off of the Aphelios onto the Jinx. He looks so much more proactive, so much better on that pick. Would love to see more of that. Aphelios is a great pick, but so is Jinx. And they're going to be good in different scenarios. Zhao Yueji is back in here for Invictus. And then June, no typo, did go away from all caps for the first time in his career. He's now just capital X. Find it kind of weird to look at, but, you know, we'll see if he sticks with it. Xiaohu is going to be my player of the series. Again, he looked phenomenal here. He was amazing this week in general. Very high candidate for player of the week. But Bin also looking a lot better. He clearly got his confidence back earlier in the week. And he carried that into this series. I think Bin on Jace has always been a good combo. And we saw that in game 1 for sure. Bin looks a lot more comfortable. Away with probably a much worse week than he had in week 1. But still pretty decent here. Much better than his series earlier in the week. And then, like I said, Gala and Ming looking really good. Especially Ming down there at support. As for Invictus, again, a really young team that shows bright spots. I think June actually had a really solid series here going up against Wei. Wei, like I said, had a little bit of a down week. But June, I thought, looked pretty good in this series. He had a pretty poor series earlier in the week, and then kind of came back with another solid one here. That's just the kind of player he is, though. He's going to have series where he looks complete garbage and is easily the dud of the series. And he's going to have series where he looks good and is probably the best player on Invictus. So, you know, another one of those for him here. Pretty solid, but nobody else was really able to keep up with that. Yuukai lost in mid, obviously he's going against Xiaohu. Zhao Yueji lost in the bot lane. They actually got Gala off of the Aphelios, so they let him win here. Zhao Yueji is going to be slightly my dud of the series here. You could give it to Yuukai. I think Yuukai was a little more proactive, though, especially in game 1 on the Corki, but I think Zhao Yueji just had no impact. Lucas clearly wants to go to these more squishy supporter enchanter type of picks. He's always been known for his Rakan, but now we're seeing a lot of Caitlyn Lux. We're seeing some Seraphine be pulled out from Lucas. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the way to go when you're the underdogs. I think those engaged champions are a little bit more safe and can give you a little more opportunity to catch some teams off guard if they're not expecting it. I think the Seraphine pick maybe is just a little too ambitious, especially with the Aphelios. But in general, not a terrible series from Invictus here. You're a young team that's growing, and you did decently well against RNG. You showed some bright spots, but RNG really is a legitimately great team here. If Xiaohu's going to play like this for the entire year, he's easily going to win MVP. I mean, him and Tarzan are really going to have to punch it out for it, I guess. But, those two have been so good at the start of the year. Xiaohu is a huge reason why RNG looks great. Bin's getting on track. Ming and Gala are finally getting on track. Hopefully, Wei can get back to where he was in week 1 and get back on that track just in general. Because if RNG is kicking on all cylinders, they very much could be a team that not only wins the LPL, but challenges for an MSI title. Jumping into our final series of week 2 here. We finally get to the end here of a very long LPL week. And it was Victory 5 taking on Top Esports in a very fun series for both teams here. A lot of storylines going in here. Karsa taking on his former Top Esports team. Fodic taking on his former Top Esports team. And the guy who replaced him in Jackie Love. Rookie taking on Jackie Love, his former teammate. I mean, there are so many fun storylines in this matchup here, and Victory 5 is able to pull out the big win here on the back of just how freaking good Rookie is. Man, he is just so good. People got mad when I put him 3rd in my power rankings for LPL mids. People were like, that's much too high. Did you see his play last year on IG? And I'm like, yes, I get it, but Rookie is still good. 2021 IG is not an indicator of Rookie as a player. Rookie is exactly who we thought he was in 2019, and we're getting that here in 2020, at least to start the year. He looks phenomenal. He's easily going to be my player of the series hero, though. Big shouts out to Karsa, who completely out-jungled Xiao Peng here and looked really dominant. That Poppy pick is awesome. I love that pick. We're seeing it a lot in the LCK, especially out of Peanut, and when we see it here in the LPL, it works really well in the same way. It's just a pick I end up enjoying a lot. And then Fodic, with a great series here, very close to being my player of the series, but Rookie just a little bit more overall impact-wise, I think I would say is a little bit higher, but Fodic with a great series here as well, probably his best series of his career, at least in the LPL up to this point, and he did it against Jackie Love. He had a little bit of a rough game 1. Jackie Love with a really big carry in game 1. I should talk about it game by game. Game 1 was firmly in the grasp of Victory 5. The fact that they didn't win it is absurd, and a lot of it was due to how well Jackie Love just team fights late game on Aphelios. He was able to kind of take over those team fights and win the game for them. Game 2, a little bit of the opposite. How that game didn't go to TES and end the series 2-0, I'll never know, because what a ridiculous comeback here from V5 in general. Just a great game overall from Fodic, from Rookie. Even Rich playing weak side really, really well, even in game 3 here on the Graves. Really liking what I'm seeing out of Rich. These are some of the best games that he's played as a pro. And it's really good to see that here in the LPL. And then game 3 was pretty in control of V5 from the beginning. A lot of that was just due to Karsa being really good on the Lee Sin. And then Rookie taking over on Orianna. They really tried to ban him out. I have no idea why. You're never going to ban out Rookie. Oh no, he's going to be put on his Orianna. He's going to hit a 5-man shockwave and win you the game. Oh wow. Just generally a great series here from Victory 5 and a huge win to beat Top, who does look shaky. Top, we've kind of discussed their struggles. They're a really solid team that doesn't necessarily have that kind of connection yet. The bot lane still ints just a little bit too much, and the jungle situation has to be figured out. I thought Xiao Peng was going to be a little bit of an answer here after week 1. He really struggled here in week 2. Definitely being the dud of the series here for TES, getting pretty hard out-jungled by Karsa. His, the man, he's essentially replacing Karsa here, but, it just not a good series from Xiao Peng. You got to figure that out. Like I said, the bot lane dies a little too much, and honestly, for what it's worth, Rookie always has had Knight's number, and that kind of came true here. Rich doing really well on top side, Zoom can't capitalize on it. Just a good series overall from Victory 5. Everybody on the team looking good, and that's exactly what you want to see. There were a lot of question marks going into this V5 team. going into 2020, what am I talking about? Going into 2022, but a lot of them have been answered. Rich has been great. Karsa's actually stepped up a lot, and Fodic has looked hit or miss, but in this series, he hit. Very, very heavily hit, so exactly what you want to see from Victory 5. A great series win from them. I'm, again, not throwing the panic towel in for Top Esports. You're losing to a pretty good team here, but the signs of worry are definitely there. You got to figure out the jungle situation. And this bot lane, unfortunately, as much as I love Jackie Love, it's just they're going to be too volatile to actually be one of the better bot lanes in the world. They're just going to die a little bit too much. They're going to make crazy plays, and they're not going to work out. Jackie Love will win you games, but he will also lose you games, and that's exactly what we saw in this series. So overall, definitely some things to work on from TES. I don't think they're like a non-playoff team because of this, but definitely some things to work on. But for a V5, what a gigantic win to close out week 2 here. Alrighty, that is going to do it for my week 2 recap and analysis of every single series in the LPL from days 1 to 7. Up on the screen right now, on the left-hand side, you're going to be seeing the current LPL standings. Any ties in terms of both series and match records will be broken by just alphabetical order. So like Edward Gaming above LNG, E's above L in the alphabet. So that's just what we got. On the right-hand side, my power rankings are going to be updated every single week. The biggest risers and fallers we'll talk about here. JD Gaming jumps up to 9 with a big win here over FunPlus Phoenix at the end of the week. They also have, you know, a big win early in the week, but the second win is significantly more important, obviously. They're actually going to jump up back into the 9th spot, which is where I had them starting off in the year. And then OMG is actually going to fall right back down to 12, which is unfortunate for them. They had a little bit of a rough week, kind of coming back down to earth. I think if you want to put them 10, that's fine. If you want to put them 11, that's fine. 10 to 12 are pretty even for me. Other risers and fallers, Bilibili does jump FPX. BLG just had a really solid series this week, and FPX gets upset by JDG. Victory 5 jumps top after beating them, and then Anyone's Legend jumps Team WE. Not because Anyone's Legend looked particularly good, but Team WE just looked bad. And the same thing could be said about LGD jumping TT Gaming. TT is going to be at 17. I had a hard time putting them at 17 because they're going to be hopefully better once they get their actual roster in, but I need to see it. They're easily the worst team in the league right now, so I'm going to have to put them down there. My player of the week is going to go, of course, to Xiaohu on RNG this week. Easily player of the week, was dominant in every single one of their series this week. And my dud of the week is going to go to Chocho on Anyone's Legend, who was really a big letdown, and, you know, his mistakes were a big reason why this team actually wasn't able to come out with a win this week. They were really close in a couple scenarios. Betty played really well, but Chocho's kind of been a pretty big letdown for Anyone's Legend this year so far. So he's going to be my dud of the week here in week 2. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like. It always helps the content. If you guys appreciate me, it would do a lot. I know some people don't like to like, and that's also fine too. You just watching to the end of the video here means a lot to me, and I really do appreciate it. You guys are the reason I make these videos, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.